Hello, everybody. Do you know how there's that old idea? I guess like when humanity was still trying to figure out like what happens to us when we die, and we ended up the Greeks and the Romans had this idea. Kind of, I'm gonna get a little bit wrong that when you die, you go to the underworld, and in the underworld, you kind of like wander around a little bit, and eventually like you start to contemplate your life, and then eventually you get drawn to like the base, the kind of end of the underworld, and you kind of go there and you're like just wandering along, and when you get there you're at the river Lethe, I think it's called, and you can drink from the river, and it wipes your brain. You forget everything that you have, and you become reincarnated, and you come out of the depth of Sheol, out of the depths of the grave, and become a new person. Well, I have to say I have returned. I have been sick. I've been in the underworld for the last 2 years, 2 weeks, sorry. And I still am not sure if I'm fully back yet, because I swear I saw like a vision of like Ben Shapiro and like some like rapper doing like some song together. And I was like, this can't be reality, but I'm going to go along as if it is reality, and we're going to start deep drinking. So welcome everyone. I've been sick, but we've got an awesome episode today. Today we're interviewing Mark Peralta, who's a Christian. Was a Christian for over 30 years. He served in ministry for about 6 years before becoming a pastor, an associate pastor of a megachurch in Texas. He now runs the Apostate of Mind podcast with his wife, Apostate Anne, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce Mark Peralta to hear his story for the first time. Welcome, Mark, to Deep Drinks Podcast.
David, it's great to be here, man. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so honored to be here.
Man, I have to be real with you. I've seen you around. I've seen you with photos of you with like Aaron Ra, and I've watched some of your content, and I was like, man, I liked you straight away. Like I liked the messages you were giving out and the vibe, but I deliberately didn't want to learn anything about your deconstruction story, because all I knew was that you used to be a pastor and now you're not a pastor, and so I want to like come into this fresh. And you chose an amazing drink to do that. So what are we drinking today?
Yeah, I'm drinking from good old Buchanan's Deluxe.
12 years.
I don't know if you've seen the. You know who Sofia Vergara is?
No. Who's
a Colombian actress? She was in Modern Family, that American sitcom. She's playing a role as a mafia drug lord in Miami, which is where I was kind of raised, and she's out drinking this in one of the episodes, because it's very much an emblematic drink, like for us Colombians. So I thought that'd be a great idea to feature that drink.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. It's actually really hard to get in Australia, and it's so I couldn't actually get the exact same drink, but because you're getting something, I guess, kind of from your homeland, I thought I would bring a Scotch. And I'm not Scottish, but McDonald is a Scottish name with the largest clan of Highland Scots. So I'm drinking a whiskey as well, but it's Balvenie Doublewood 12 year, which I thought I'd get the same aged year. There we go. There it is. Nice. So that's what I'm drinking today, and I'm very much looking forward to this. It's so good. For me, it's 11 a.m. and it's always good to drink at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. So my first question for you is, like, I'm just ready to just dive in. So tell us about what kind of Christian were you? Tell us about your upbringing.
Sure. So I grew up in the Catholic Church. So I was raised as a Catholic. I did my first communion, confirmation, and, my entire family was Catholic. And then when we moved to America, kind of got away from it a little bit and ended up coming back to an evangelical church. So as a child, as a kid, I was Catholic, went to Catholic school, and as an adult later became an evangelical Christian.
Right.
So, yeah.
So did you, how old were you when you kind of moved to an evangelical kind of church?
Yeah. So I was attracted, as early as when I senior year in high school. So
Okay.
had friends of mine that were Christian, and then invited me over to certain youth events and that kind of thing. So from then, I think the seed was planted of like, hey, this seems like a better place. They have better music. It's a little more lively. It's not as monotonous. The whole kneeling and standing up and that kind of thing. And I like the fact that there was not like confession. So that was a plus. And so I was attracted to it, and then kind of, I dabbled in and out. But then it was not until I got married with Apostate Ann, who was a Christian at the time when we met, when we started taking it seriously. We had friends and family that recommended us that, hey, if you want your marriage to last, you've got to seek God, and that whole
the three twined cord.
Yeah, that's right. The little triangle pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just, that made sense. And so we wanted our family, our kids, our future kids to be raised in a Christian household. And so as adults, newly, we got rebaptized at a covenant church, which was a charismatic evangelical church.
Mm-hmm.
And did the whole public proclamation, and then got really into serving at the church. And I eventually decided that, I love the scriptures. I always felt passionate for them, but I felt like I wanted to learn more. And I think maybe that was something that also attracted me to the evangelical church. I felt like they were taking their time to explain things and get into theology and stuff like that, where that was not really the case at the Catholic Church. And so I went to Bible college. I'm like, you know what? I want to learn this and, become proficient. I like what I'm hearing, but I'm also hearing words in Greek and stuff like that I'm not familiar with. I'm like, I want to know what that means.
Yeah.
So I changed my, I had originally set out to go to dental school because I wanted to be a dentist, but I changed my degree, got a Bible degree, undergraduate degree in Bible studies. And then I continued on to theological seminary, went to Dallas Theological Seminary, and did a master's in biblical studies as well.
Wow.
So, yeah, it changed my life completely.
So, really okay, so I want to step back a little bit. So when you and Anne decided that you wanted to take your relationship or your Christianity more seriously, what did that look like? Because for my wife and I think we were kind of the same in that I wanted to when I've been terrified of getting divorced and and just like terrified of like our marriage failing ever since before we were even married. And I would like when we got married, I wanted to take our finances seriously. I wanted to take our beliefs seriously. I wanted to really like think deeply about who we were as people, and I wanted to not fall into the trap of Satan or into the trap of anything that could ruin this beautiful thing that we had. So could you tell us a little bit about like why did you want to take it more seriously when you got married, and what did that look like?
Yeah, so I mean, it just seemed like the real deal, and I think that the evangelical church today is very good at presenting value to their congregation, because we got into like youth groups and serving there, and then you get attracted to serving in other areas of the church, and then they offer programs like financial peace and stuff like that are like you're getting Christian education on how to run your home finances. So they have a lot of value for the family. In fact, one of the things that I learned later as a pastor is that children is really what they're marketing to in most mega churches. It's the children's ministry. That's where the money goes. That's because they know like families want to find a home where they can get all these benefits and just do the Christian life in the best way possible. So that seemed like the right choice for us.
Yeah, it's funny you say that, because even recently I've been thinking like, oh, it's a bummer that Atlas, our 1-year-old, is not going to grow up with that like tight knit, I guess, church community that I grew up with, or my wife grew up with, and it's kind of like, I wish there was like a secular or like some sort of a thing that was because it adds huge benefit, right? Having these like communities, it's like it's actually really helpful. Of course, it comes with like the fear of hell and purity culture and all that other stuff that is not good, and a false worldview. But
yeah. So you think about morals and raising stand-up children, but also benefits too. Like if you have young children, it's very appealing. Like lots of churches will do daycare programs, where you feel safe, right? As a young parent, like you're gonna bring your toddler, you're gonna leave it in the hands of another adult. Might as well be a Christian. And so you start getting all sort of caught up in this web of life. And before you know it, everyone around you is part of the church. So we did a lot of Bible study, small cell groups we led for years. Because, I got really deep into I just loved, I'm still very fascinated by scripture. So I'd be the guy to, put together a study and pass out, little handouts and and then we've got coffee and we've got little snacks and, you're doing community. And we had lots of friends that, we eventually lost later when we moved away from church. But yeah, it becomes life.
Yeah. And what kind of Christian were you? And this is a big thing for me because I don't know if I would say I was judgmental as a Christian, but for me, like I was very serious about like lukewarm Christians, and I was always paranoid that I was going to become a lukewarm Christian. I thought that the Bible clearly said that, you would take up your cross daily and follow Jesus. You would pray for the sick. You would, it was all consuming. And I'm getting the vibe that it was all consuming for you as well. Were you in a part of a church that did like speaking in tongues? Did you do healing, like do laying on hand of healings, anything like that?
Yeah. So it was certainly around. The speaking in tongues was, sometimes you hear a pastor do that from stage. And I never felt like I had the urge to speak in tongues. So it wasn't really part of my experience. In fact, in my own personal learning, I accepted this perspective that, these charismatic gifts or the spiritual gifts were something that was just meant for the apostles. This is known as the cessationist perspective on spiritual gifts, in that it was meant for them, and so no wonder I ended up going to Dallas Theological Seminary, because they're very big on this cessationist perspective about that. So
can we like take a little tangent on that and just explore that a little bit?
Sure.
Because I have friends and family that are kind of going down that route who have previously been like miracles and speaking in tongues is all good. There's this one verse that I get confused about. Just put on your Christian hat again really quickly and just like explain this to me. I think it's is it the Johannine comma? It's the it's John. I think it's in John where it says like you will drink poison and
is it the one about the snakes? You can
I think so.
Snakes?
I think so. It's like the idea is like, because I asked a Jehovah's Witness this once, and I said, because I looked in their Bible and it says in Mark 16, 15, he said to them, "Go into the world and preach the gospel to all creation. Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will accompany those who believe. In my name, they will drive out demons. They will speak in new tongues. They will pick up snakes with their hands, and they will drink deadly poison, and it will not hurt them at all. They will place their hands on the sick people, and they will get well." So I was like, I don't know how that perspective, tell me, how does that perspective, how do you away that?
Yeah, so at seminary, they quickly would shut that one down, because I don't know if your Bible will tell you this, but if you read between verses 8 and 9, there should be a little asterisk that will say the earliest manuscripts, blah, blah, blah. So what that means is very likely that part of the passage, that ending. In fact, the whole post-resurrection encounter here in the Gospel of Mark is not part of the earliest or the oldest manuscripts available. And so what's believed among scholars is that it was actually added later, so we should have no reason to trust this as divine inspiration.
Yeah, unless
it really does seem like they're getting superpowers.
Yeah, it truly does. And even like the story of Acts and, you know, the disciples and the apostles. Yeah. Okay, well, we could do a whole episode just on that. But going back to your story, so you go through Bible college, you go through seminary. What do you start to discover in? Well, I don't even know. Do you start to discover problems when you go through seminary and Bible college, or is it only later that you start?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it can go either way. You know, I had friends that graduated from seminary and they are pastors. They're all in, have been for years. And then there's been some that have left ministry. And so for me, I started noticing things because, you know, they teach you Greek and Hebrew. So all of a sudden you can interpret the scripture by checking this original language thing, you know? And so in seminary, they teach you how to handle it, how to translate. You learn about syntax, grammar. You get a bunch of tools. You know, I bought scripture software where I can map out the syntax on any given verse and have access to a bunch of books. And, I bought so many commentaries because I'm like, you know what? I hate driving down to the library. And I've got young children at home, so I've got to have tools, you know. So you get all these tools. So then if you start using them, you notice that there are some issues and that not everyone agrees with your professors, your evangelical profs.
Yeah.
That you're learning this stuff from.
Yeah. Do you know what's incredibly frustrating is I got a Strong's Concordance and I was like, this is it. This is all you ever need to understand the Bible. And then I was like, and then someone's like, no, that's not, you got to get the interlinear. So I got the interlinear, right? I spent all this money on the interlinear. It was $100 or something. Like, yeah, I got the interlinear. And then Dr. Kip's like, no, I think it was Dan McClellan was like, Dr. Dan, he's like, I think you need the software because if you really need to, like, you got to get software. And I was like, and then I was talking to Kip and Dr. Kip, and he's like, there's really no substitute from learning the languages yourself because you need to know the context. I'm like, damn it. Like, there's just no easy way to unlock this. Like, you have to really, like, get into the weeds. You can't just look up a word and be like, it says day. So that means it means day in, like, you know, the 7-day creation account, for example.
Yeah. I mean, and you say Strong's Concordance, but, like, when you know what a lexicon is?
I know the name.
So it's just a fancy word for a dictionary, but it's a dictionary for like the Greek and the Hebrew. So there are these two, well, there's several, but you know, you got to work with at least these two major ones. And so you could look up any word in the original language and then see what the lexicon says, what it means. And then you learn that there are all these different usages. Like there's never like this one straight answer, like, yeah, this means that. You know, and that's it. There's like all this ambiguity and like there are all these debates as to which usage of what, you know. And so it becomes a game. It's actually it's fun, you know, to discover things. Yeah. At least for me, it was, you know, entertaining.
It's what blows my mind even more. What blows my mind even more, when I learned about this was there's all these debates about their manuscripts, right? And like the Greek, but Jesus didn't speak in Greek. He spoke in Aramaic, and these were recorded by God knows who, and they're anonymous authors, 40, 70, like 40 to 50, 60 years after the fact in a different language by people who probably never even met Jesus. And like, it's so far removed that I don't know if you can trust anything that's like word for word, maybe like broad strokes. You know, there was a guy named Jesus he died, he was resurrected. People believe that he rose from the dead, maybe. But like, I don't know if you can like take like a like section of what Jesus said and be like, this is what he said in English. Like, I just don't. I don't know how that's possible.
Yeah, no. In seminary, they taught us about this thing that it was an event known as the Jesus Seminar.
Mm.
Yeah, you've heard of this,
I've heard
where
about that.
scholars sat around and they voted. They would vote verse by verse, like what's the likelihood that Jesus said that. And so when it came down to it, there was really not a whole lot left. You know, like the red letter Bible, that's not any way, accurate. You know.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do begin to learn of different things. Like for me, it started with the first 5 books of Moses.
Mm.
I don't know if you've heard of the documentary hypotheses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you learn that in seminary.
Well, tell us a little bit about the documentary hypothesis and why. I've heard that it's completely wrong from apologists and that Moses wrote that with a ballpoint pen.
Yeah, so that's not what like mainstream academics say. So it's actually the other way around. It's very unlikely that there was actually a historical Moses, and that B, that he wrote these things. So what it really does seem like, and that's where the documentary hypothesis, which it doesn't just come from one person, although if you Google search Wellhausen documentary hypotheses, you'll find kind of like the main guy. And so you can learn from him that there were actually different sources that can be accounted for, all 5 books. Like even Genesis is not coming from one desk. There's several voices present throughout the text that at some point they became compiled together, and now we get them, Genesis, from cover to cover. But
did he write the book? I'm sorry for interrupting you. But did he write the book, The Bible with Sources Revealed?
I don't know.
I think.
Let's see.
I have it somewhere. It was a really expensive little book, but it's got all the, like what you're saying, it's got like the different scrolls and different like, was it like JA, like the Bible with Sources Revealed. It has like different scrolls that we use, and like you read the Bible, but it like highlights them. Like the red letters are from the specific scrolls, and the green letters from these specific scrolls, and then you can read it, and it actually makes a lot more sense. Apparently, I haven't spent the time to actually read it.
Yeah, that seems like a nice tool. If it's the one that I'm thinking here, that one's from Richard Friedman, perhaps. It's the same one.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. There's one online source. I think it's called Digital Pentateuch as well, that I oftentimes consult for when we're doing a Bible study. But yeah, that's exactly right. You've got like several sources that are like sort of webbed together. And then so scholars are looking at differences in style, different vocabularies, different perspectives. It really does sound like it's a patchwork, and that's what they're arguing. So you're like, all right, so it seems like it didn't come from one source, and seminary is teaching us that, this is divinely inspired, that ultimately God is the source of all this, and that this guy Moses was chosen, and that the Exodus was historical. But when you look at what archaeologists are saying about what's in Egypt and what it's not, and what modern day scholars of like ancient Near East are saying, such as Kip Davis, Joshua Bowen, Joel Baden. Well, he's more of a Hebrew Bible scholar, but they're like, maybe there was not even a historical Moses. And there's all this evidence about that. And so you're like, wait, keep going. Then you look at the Gospels, and that's another world of issues there with the, the Gospels. And there really are different stories.
Yeah.
You know, we all kind of grow up thinking that there's one harmonious life of Christ, you know, and that's in fact the name of the one of the first courses that they teach you in Bible college is the life of Christ, because they want you to sort of like know the Bible with this sort of unified narrative, you know, where everything's synthesized together. But in reality, when you look at each gospel critically, and it gets a lot of fun. Like we've done where, you know, if you read the birth narratives in Matthew, and then you write down everything that happens, and then you do the same for Luke. These are different stories. So what's going on here?
It's very frustrating for me, because when you can bring these to an apologist and there is an answer for everything. There is a way around it. There really is. There's a way around everything. Maybe something's metaphorical. Maybe something was like not historical, but deliberately not historical. Like it could be anything. Like we're talking about people who literally believe Jesus is coming back when he told his disciples 3 times, "Truly, I tell you, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen." I mean, it's there's just a way to get around everything. And where are you? Can you tell us where you're at the moment? Are you in America? Like what state you're in?
Yeah, I'm in Texas.
Yeah. So okay, I'm in the Sunshine Coast in Australia, in Queensland, about an hour north of Brisbane. If I told you, like, I'm going to walk to your house, right? And I've told this analogy before, but I'm going to walk to Mark's house, and then tomorrow I'll rock up and I'm like, I walked here, right? And then, you know, later, 100 years, there's a religion of deep drinks, and like David actually walked all the way to Mark's house, and then people are like, no, I don't really think he could have walked, because like there's a whole ocean between Australia and Texas, like it's impossible to walk that far. And then an apologist comes up, and a deep drinks apologist says, actually, David was trying to teach us about deep vein thrombosis, and it's important to walk up and down the aisle on a plane. You see, he was actually teaching us science. There's science in deep drinks, and you know there's a way to make that work. But it's just not honest. It's just not, like, to me, it's dishonest, and it's motivated reasoning, and it just doesn't work to me.
Yeah, because essentially their job is to defend what's already been considered dogma that you cannot question. You know, and that's how you got to live your life. One of the things that I did, this I learned from other students in seminary. I thought, now I think about it, is pretty odd and just straight up illustrative of the mentality of an evangelical Bible reader. And is that so I got this little Bible that was, you know, a little pocket, small, you know, preacher's Bible. And the seminary would pass out these "We Believe" little booklets, which what it is is their creedal statement. You know, all the different articles of faith, like what they believe about the scriptures, the Godhead, angels, the dispensations, about creation, salvation. Like what, essentially, this is what my professors had to sign. He's saying, yes, I believe all this, in order for them to maintain their, you know, get a job there and maintain their job. And so a good scholar that I would then keep this little thing inside my little Bible case. Why? Because I'm gonna make sure that whatever I'm interpreting from this, that it matches with the dogma of my institution. And so that's, you know, when you're doing it that way, when that's how you're interpreting scripture, well, you're bound to make some mistakes along the way. You know, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I was coughing my lungs up a second ago, so I'm muted. But that seems like incredibly dishonest to me. Like, it seems like very. I just don't know how someone can look at that and go, "Yep, this seems like an honest thing to do." Is to like make everyone like subscribe to these tenets, and you can't. Like, people pick on the Catholic Church for this kind of stuff, but then evangelical churches and young Earth creationist organizations do the same thing.
Yeah, I remember they had me take a test before I got admitted into my program, and it was a theology, like what you believe. And there was at the end of my degree, I remember having to write a research paper on like a personal doctrinal statement. Is what a doctrinal statement. And it's just like they're making sure that you're coming in with the right theology and you're leaving with the right theology.
And did you leave with the right theology? Because you mentioned that you started to question some of the things like speaking in tongues and things like that. How did your perspective shift over the course of your education?
So I don't think I had enough time to really process everything, because like I got hired as a pastor like the year I graduated.
Yeah, it's so similar to me.
Yeah.
You hear all these things and you're like, yeah, I was a youth pastor, but it's like you hear all these things and you're like, I'll just put that on the shelf to like dissect later, because you don't have time, because you're doing assignments and then you're becoming a pastor, and then like, yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So I had all the right books on the shelf that eventually helped me later come out of that, deconstruct my own way. But it was a process, So jumping right into ministry, I was there about a year and a half or so. Didn't last long at all. And so that, I would say, coupled with what I had already been thinking about and kind of wondering about at that moment, I wouldn't say that I was becoming a skeptic yet, but I was certainly thinking that, hey, perhaps this whole, the scripture is infallible idea is not all right. Nonetheless, we're gonna trust, that God is gonna lead us and He has a plan for us. So it was not until like later though that I started like fully deconstructing. But I don't know if it's clear enough so far before I start talking about ministry, but I can talk about some of the things that occurred there that continue that snowball.
Yeah.
Okay, so as a pastor, first of all, it was we were all in, like we were living in one side of the city, of the metroplex, and we uprooted our family over to this other city so that we can be close to this church. And so we completely like just moved away from like my in-laws and other friends that were close to us to be at this one church, and we poured ourselves into this community. And I was hired as an associate pastor, where the senior pastor was a fellow student with me at seminary. So we knew each other in seminary, and he was already part of this ministry that was a Hispanic ministry within a Anglo English-speaking megachurch. And so they hired me as an associate pastor, and I start working in ministry. Coming to find out, I'm over here like not necessarily doing theology or writing sermons or writing books, but just more like operations. I'm working on the stage. I'm like coordinating with the volunteers, and I'm doing all this other stuff that I didn't think that was prepared for in seminary. I didn't learn how to do all that. They wanted me to do like essentially marketing for them. I was doing translating sermons from English to Spanish, and also fulfilling other ministry related things like fulfilling prayer requests and doing like marital counseling. So I was in there like Monday through Sunday, and it became my everything. And so I'm like a year in, it's like, I miss my family. I don't, as a pastor, I'm hardly ever home, because you're there in the morning and then you're there until late, and then you're expected to be part of like extracurricular activities as a pastor, and like visiting small groups, and like, leading
Oh,
workshops on Saturday. And it's
I
so draining.
it is really. Can I just butt in there quickly and just
Yeah, please.
I had the associate pastor tell me. He asked me how many hours are my leaders volunteering when I was a youth pastor, my volunteers. And I'd be like, well, there's this person does this many hours, and they help set up on a Friday, and they do half a day there, and then maybe like 14 hours a week, which was a lot for some of them. And then he's like, well, if you're expecting them to do 14 hours volunteering, you should be doing at least 14 hours on top of your job. So that's how they like get you. Like it's like, and there's things like Tuesday night prayer meeting, or or it's like that's just seen as like a thing that you go to, not like that's not considered volunteering. You're just being a part of the church family. So it becomes, I can feel you. So it becomes all encompassing, like really quickly. Like your whole life becomes the church.
Yeah, yeah. And not to mention that, you've got to go out and do evangelism, and so it becomes like where you're never, you're hardly ever home. You don't have a weekend. I was used to having a weekend because while I was working my way through seminary, I was already in the dental field, and I was a lab tech and was doing a lot, and I had a professional work environment experience prior to working in ministry.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of my friends, they never had a job elsewhere, and so I don't think that they could like compare apples to apples. I just felt like, man, the church experience is so different. The politics are so different. It just doesn't feel like the American dream. This is something different.
What
And
Dee actually asked,
yeah.
what's a pastor's salary? And it's great to see, by the way, it's great to see I Kill Bill, Dee, Pragmatic Crystal, Cheryl. It's great to see so many of you guys, Carrie Ann, so many people here, Kip Davis. So good to see everyone in the chat. But what is a pastor's salary in America?
Yeah, so I mean, if you're like a hired pastor, like an associate pastor that I was, you probably making anywhere between like 40, 70 a year if you're lucky. Now if you have your own church, I'm not so sure. And I don't even know how that works. But
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the money is not necessarily proportionate to the work that you put in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I was on like $18 an hour. It's like minimum wage. And I only I only did 2 days a week, and then I had to do an extra 2 days volunteering as well. So I was pretty much working almost full time, but I was only getting like a couple $100 a week kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah. And that's Australian dollars. That's dollary dues. That's
oh wow.
That's, yeah. Yeah.
And then you've got a tithe.
Oh yeah. Yep.
So, and they really do frown upon you if you're not giving your 10%. Like that's expected 100%.
I heard of this church who they passed around the basket, and they do it every week, and then one week they added a person with a camera. So it was like a camera and the basket, and they're as a sermon, and obviously the tithing's like quadrupled, like it went like through the roof that week, and they were talking about how God sees everything, like like it's like
wow.
So it's like it's just so manipulative. It's wild. Yeah.
Oh yeah, one of the things that was a shocker for me to experience was, you ever heard of like these capital raise campaign where they're raising money for some church thing? We went through. Yeah, so like they were gonna remodel the main auditorium and build more classrooms and expand children's ministry. $20 million later, kind of thing. And so, as a pastor, you have to promote that. So we were basically coached into organizing small groups, and so where we can go there and discuss and get people enrolled and sign up as many pledges as possible. And it was disgusting.
Yeah.
They bring in like consultants from consulting firms about this. Like there are experts that come to churches to provide, best practices and to organize this whole campaign to raise money. And I remember at the end, like they wanted from us anywhere between $10,000-$20,000 commitment. And yeah, and we ended up saying no. We just can't. And I think
when you say from you, like, do you mean from your team or do you mean from you and
no, just like us personally? Yeah.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah. So I'm like, I'm still paying school loans for seminary, and we have 2 young children, and it's like, we just can't, like, honestly, we just can't give more. Yeah.
That's insane. We didn't experience the worst thing that I experienced. Have you seen The Wolf of Wall Street, the movie?
Yeah.
You know that scene where Jordan Belford is like, are you behind on your payments? Great, pick up the phone and start dialing. Is your landlord going to kick you out? Pick up the phone and start dialing. I went to a Planet Shakers conference and it was literally like that. This guy had money and he would put it on the stage and he'd put it on the stage and he'd be like, are you wanting a new career, or are you wanting that promotion at work? Good, start tithing. And he's like, this is for my promotion. He's like, do you want a healthy relationship? Here, more. And he's just like kept putting more money on the stage and like stepping it back as he put money on the stage. Like, you want a beautiful family? Here, put money on. He's like, start tithing, because if you give to God's house, it'll come back sevenfold. And like, everyone's like, give me all the money after they've spent thousands of dollars on the tickets and merch and CDs and DVDs and all that. It's absolutely insane.
Yeah. And it's not like something that just takes place over a weekend. It'll be like a month-long campaign where they're just, pushing it on your face. And I remember, like, my pastor, my supervisor, he confronted me about it. He's like, "Hey, what's going on? You're not gonna pledge this?" I'm like, "No." Like, personally, he approached me to confront me about that.
I'm confused by this. How do they know how much you're pledging, or like how much you're? Because don't you just put cash in the bucket?
They kept track of everything. Another thing that shocked my world was learning that my pastor, the lead pastor, knew who was our top payers, our top tithers. Like, I remember one day he asked me, "Hey, do you know who our number 1 tither is? Like, who gives the most?" And I'm like, "What?" It's like, "Yeah, you know who it is." And he gave me the name. I'm like, "How do you know that?" "Well, we keep track." So they know. They have metrics. Yeah, and that's the other thing. It's all about the numbers too. I was charged with increasing church attendance. It was my responsibility. And so, yeah, I mean, you had ushers that are clicking everyone that comes in every day, because they're like making sure they're tracking all the numbers. So it just becomes, it's really much a business, very much like, I don't know, maybe a fancy gym or a fancy spa that's selling memberships. People come in, they get, lured into this, and, that's how you do it. That's how these churches become mega churches.
Yeah. One of the churches, it's not really mega, it's a couple of thousand people, probably less, probably like 500 on Sunday. In Brisbane, my boss actually went there, and he said, I think it was like 4 or 5 times he got it's the same guy introduced himself to him, like, "Hey, how you doing? It's great my name's X. It's great to see you." And he's like, "Yeah, we chatted last week." And like, there's this fake, like, welcome to the family, you know, and like, but they're not even remembering your name or your face, and like you're there every week, and it's just like you just get introduced to the same person comes up to you like they've never met you, like
Oh
welcome.
yeah, yeah, and that's
Yeah,
all. Like you train your volunteers to do that.
yeah,
I was in charge of that. You know, we put people like outside the church already
yeah,
greeting you before you come in. And then as you're coming in, that whole ushering of it, that's all that you're trying to make these people feel super special.
yeah,
And so it's all programming. It's all predetermined. And so,
yeah. And it works, and that's the thing, is it works really well. And even like I had friends, I was never musically talented or anything, but I had friends in the band, and they would go away to band like worship camp or whatever, and they would learn how to be good worship leaders. And they would say things like, you want to use this chord. If you're writing a song, you want to use this chord and then go to one of these chords, or you want to do this and then do this, because that will get someone's emotional state ready to receive God. And people there aren't going like, oh, this is a scam, this is a great idea. They're going, wow, what beautiful talent and gifts that God's given us to, you know, open people's hearts towards God. I was told as a preacher that my job as a preacher was to get people to walk to the end of the diving board and then jump off into God's spirit, into God's presence, and that was the whole goal. So if I was going to be a bit manipulative in my altar call, and classic one is going, I want everyone to close their eyes, and like I want you to raise your hand if you feel your heart beating, and that's God calling you. I'm going to count to 3. 1, God loves you. He's perfect for you. Like right now there's angels in this room and they're surrounding you. If you feel God calling you in your heart, that's the Holy Spirit. 2, this is the most important decision of your life, you know. And I'm doing the countdown, I'm doing all these like little things, and that's okay, because I'm just getting people to walk to the end of the diving board. I'm getting them to move past their flesh so they can move into the spirit. And it's so, when you look at it from the outside, it's like so manipulative. It's like gaslighting an entire congregation. And if you're really good at it, you're like, you know, that's the people who sell books and pastor mega churches and become friends of Justin Bieber, and like, you know, that's it.
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's all by design. All of that is by design. I remember, so for every Sunday service, for every weekly service, we would have a midweek sermon preparation meeting. And so I was part of this meeting on a weekly basis. So I got to see, you know, how the church kind of goes on about getting ready for that weekend service. And it's amazing. It's just like an executive meeting. You've got the senior pastor, you've got the worship minister and his tech assistant guy, and then you have a communications director who's an expert in like marketing and brand, the whole thing about the brand of the church. So she's there, and then there's a couple of other people, my supervisor, and they're going through like, all right, this is how the service is going to go. And, you know, everyone knows already like what the message is going to be about and like what the series is. And they've already pre-decided like what kinds of music that they're going to be using in that for that series, the color schemes that we're going to be designing the stage on, everything that's going to be published online, or, you know, handouts. All that is already pre-designed. And in like when it comes to like the music choices and all that is all by design. Like, all right, so if the message is going to lead me to compelling people to surrender to Christ, we need to make sure that we have this kind of song follow, or while I'm doing the prayer, play this. Immediately after, you're gonna play that song, and then the worship minister is gonna lead them to prayer and do this about, and then emphasize this aspect of it. And it's like it's all of it. It's a theatrical. It's show business.
But it's, you know, when you're kind of in it, you're like, this is great. This leads people to God. This is like, we're just doing things well to lead. I have to ask, before we jump into like your deconstruction and why you started deconstructing, do you have a preaching voice?
You know, I hated that actually. Yeah, I never got into that.
That's why you didn't last long. You had to have a preaching voice.
Yeah, no. I was told like, yeah, you'll find your voice and everything, but I never really cared about the theatrics of it. I was more like, you know, I want to be able to communicate the message, and I want to do it correctly, and I want to do it to the best of my ability, honoring the God that inspired it.
Yeah.
And I want to be good at it. I want to be accurate. I want to be effective. And, you know, it shouldn't be up to my own preachy self. It should be about the message. The message itself should be what's transforming lives, not how I'm saying it.
100%.
But yeah, I never really cared for the preacher voice.
No, I never think I really got a preacher's voice, but we went to a recent Carols on the River, which is run by some local churches, and it's mainly secular, but there's a Jesus message in there sometimes. And this year it was run by the local Hillsong pastor, and well, he was doing the message. And I apologize, I'm gonna try and do the voice, but he gets up on stage. And you're like, who's this dude? He's like wearing cool clothes. He's like a cool looking motherfucker, you know what I mean? And he gets up and he goes, I forgot what he's who he called out, but he gets up on the mic. It's really quiet. It's just finished some carols, and he goes, Billy! And there's a big pause. And then he goes, Billy! Again, and there's a big pause. And he's like, Billy! A third time, and then he's like, you see, my cousin Billy, he'd always run around. And he'd be looking and climbing trees, and we're looking for Billy. And then, like, you talk like that, right? And then he's like, and when Billy was really young, one night we couldn't find him. He wasn't in the bed, and we looked outside and we saw him, and he was on the chicken coop. So we went outside and we're like, Billy, what are you doing? And he was reaching up to the stars, and he's like, Dad, if only I can touch the stars, I'll be able to touch heaven. Billy wanted to touch heaven. But what Billy didn't understand is that the only way to get to heaven is through Jesus. And like, it's like that whole like, fucking, and it makes me like, I'm getting goosebumps. It makes me cringe. I hate it so much. But it was like, I watched this and I was sitting there like, oh my God, like I was feeling internal like feelings that I haven't felt in so long. It made me kind of calm. It made me kind of anxious. It made me like conflicted. And like, I didn't like it, but I knew it was happening to me, but it was effective in this message. But that was such a classic Australian like youth pastor style preach. If you want to know more about Jesus, we've got people here that, you know, like, and it's just like, fuck, like, shut up, like,
yeah.
Oh God.
Isn't that Hillsong? That's an Australian thing?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Hillsong started in Sydney, but we've got churches all over the world now, and you know, there's churches in New York and stuff, and there's the Noosa Church. We got friends that are part of the Noosa Church, and the Noosa Church was running that section. I'm sure the pastor's a nice dude or whatever, but he's just in the source. You know what I mean? Like he's good at what he does. He talks in that accent in that way, and tells like
very deep voice.
yeah. Just like I mean, the American style is a little bit different, isn't it? It's like a bit more like, and God said, like it's very like like.
Right, yeah, that sounds like
no one can touch my God. Like it's very like TD Jakes, very like, you know, like that's the vibe I get. Yeah.
That's that Southern thing, you know, the Southern Baptist.
Oh wow. So you've like now gone through in your story, you've gone through Bible college, you've gone through seminary. When do you start to doubt? And of course, you know, your beautiful wife, Apostate Anne, you got children together. She's a Christian at the time. How does that work? How do you are you deconstructing together? What tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, well, I feel like I should kind of maybe say a couple of things about the ministry experience, and then we move on to deconstruction and Apostate Anne. So at the church, a couple of things happened. One was the whole thing about the money, and me feeling like they really cared more about the money than cared about me and stuff. But then I had an incident with a director of technology guy, like the tech guy, the main techie guy. And this was like maybe about a month into my tenure there, so I was brand new. And it was some. I was given a directive like, hey, this Sunday we're gonna need choir risers, and so, but I'm like, okay, so what do we get those? And then he's like, you just talk to this guy, and then he'll hook you up or whatever. So I contacted him like, hey, this Sunday we're gonna need choir risers at the Hispanic auditorium. So can you help us out? He's like, yeah, sure, don't worry. And then coming to find out, he meant for me to go get them myself and then install them at our stage. But I thought that he would just say, because he had like assistants and a whole team of people that did stage stuff. But for in this situation, I had to go to get it myself. So I ended up not knowing that I had to go get it. I just assumed that they would drop it off, is what I did probably. And then coming to find out on Sunday, they weren't there. So I'm like, hey, the choir risers, they're not on stage. He's like, yeah, you got to come get them. And I'm like, okay. Like I'm preaching in 10, 15 minutes. Like there's no way. And so he came out and confronted me personally to like explain to me the situation. I thought at first, but he got really angry at me and like got it on my face and made a fist like that. Like he got terribly insulted because I'm like, hey, I thought that you were gonna drop him off or something. Like I was just trying to clarify my misunderstanding of what he, how things work here. I'm brand new, and he got real defensive and mad at me. And I then confided to my senior pastor like what happened. I'm like, hey, this situation happened. It was a misunderstanding. He got really upset with me and threatened me, by getting to my face and making a fist at me. Like, hey, I forget exactly what he said, but so anyway, as a result of that, my supervisor then got in touch with his supervisor and organized a meeting for us to hash it out. Well, I show up a little bit earlier to the scheduled time, and it was enough where it was like maybe 10, 15 minutes early, and I'm like sitting there waiting, and I noticed that they were already meeting with him. Like my supervisor was already with the guy that I had the incident with and his supervisor, and they were already talking for a while. So when I got there and to share my side of the story, they had already, it seemed like they were just circling the wagons on me because they made it pretty clear that, I was out of character or something like that is what they were charging me with. So it was kind of disappointing because I felt like, hey, I am kind of like the whistleblower here. I'm the guy who just got like, bullied, and it's my fault. Yeah. So that was pretty bad. But then ministry continued on, and kind of water under the bridge situation. And then towards the end of the year, I ended up getting fired, or let go for some other reason, and. Well, the reason that they're going to tell me is perhaps not the real reason. I may not know the true reason why they let me go. But long story short, at the end of the year, we have like this retreat where we are like with the elders and we're talking about next year and like what worked this year and what we want to do for the next year. And one of the ideas that I championed at this meeting was, hey, we really should hire a full-time worship pastor, because at the time we had a part-time guy that, I felt like he wasn't really, doing it service. Like the quality needed to improve. Like I'm in charge of keeping people on the seats. I'm in charge of the numbers. Like it's my responsibility to fill the pews. And it's like, okay, I think we need to improve in these areas. And one of those, we need someone that's going to be more of a professional to run the worship ministry. And which wasn't necessarily widely accepted when I voiced it. But later, after the meeting and everything, they ended up deciding, like now this is the elders and the main senior pastor. that they were indeed going to hire a new worship pastor, but that there was not going to be enough budget for myself and him. And essentially what they were going to do, they were going to hire someone from out. They ended up hiring somebody from out of town that was kind of a famous dude. Because you have these superstars in evangelical worship ministry that are hired in different places. They brought someone from out of town, and now they can't afford us both. And so they're like, so we're sorry, we're going to have to let you go because we can't. And you're welcome to continue to be part of our ministry and be part of this, but we just can't have you on staff. And so we're sorry. And I was like, major shocker. And, it destroyed me because I'm thinking, here I am like a year later after I uprooted my entire family. We bought a house. We, like I said, we poured ourselves into this new community and made all these friends. And, we did the ministry thing. And so now we need to look elsewhere. Because I need a salary, so, but that wasn't it though. If that was the only thing, maybe I would have just got hired somewhere else because you could understand, money is real. So, but they were like, but here's the thing though, we don't want you to say that. And so here's what we do want you to say. And they gave me a piece of paper and it had written, basically what I would eventually read Sunday morning. And I'm like, okay. And so the statement read like something like, I was leaving the ministry to pursue other interests, and that's why we're saying goodbye. So there was no mention of we don't have enough funds. There was no mention of we're going on a different direction, hiring a full-time worship pastor instead of an associate pastor. It was just simply that I had other interests, and so I was leaving and saying goodbye.
Whoa,
and so, yeah.
So dishonest. Well,
For sure.
It's just a lie. It's just a blatant lie.
Blatant lie, yeah. It was, it wasn't, nothing remotely close to the situation.
Lying for Jesus.
So, yeah. And apostate Anne felt horrible. Like she felt disgusted by it. She didn't even want to, because they made us, well, I say made, but they were like, yeah, we want you to, this was on Wednesday when they let me go. They're like, we want you to come back on Sunday morning so that you can so that we can give you proper goodbyes. And that's when I would read that statement and say goodbye. She didn't want to be part of it. It's like, I'm not going to go upstage. I'm not going to do that. And I ended up like almost like not forcing, but I'm like, let's just do this and get out. Like, because I didn't want people to think that there was anything wrong or going bad between me and my wife. Because that's the first thing that a lot of people think is like, ooh, some sin happened.
Yeah.
Why are you getting fired? You're getting fired? You did something.
Yeah.
And so,
especially if Anne's not on stage with you, it's like, oh, it's a infidelity sin, like it's a sexual sin or something. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. If she's not there with you, then so she was kind enough to do it, and she, we all went upstage and said goodbye to this congregation. And so that was very hard for us. We at the time we hadn't even thought about deconversion or anything about that. We were just like, what are we gonna do? What am I gonna do? I've given the last 9-10 years of Bible education that I just don't feel like I want to be in the ministry anymore. Like that just doesn't seem like something I want to go back to. But let's give ourselves some time, and we gave us a couple of years because we felt like, I don't know, maybe you're just burned out and you need some time, need some space, and then you can get back into the ministry. And so we did that, and then tried to go back to a church, and it just didn't feel like anything was the right fit for us anymore, because we felt like even if you're in a different church, like you see the same things, you get the same energies of just manipulating people.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah.
That is it's actually making me quite emotional, because it's so similar to like, not exactly, but like when because I was only a youth pastor. I wasn't a youth pastor for long, maybe even less than, I probably think less than a year. But the way that it happened for me is I was hired by the senior pastor, given to the care of the associate pastor. The associate pastor told me from the start, who's now the senior pastor, that he doesn't think that I'm ready for ministry. I was too young. I was only 19. Fair enough. And so I think he started like essentially a campaign to kind of remove me. Sounds conspiratorial, but he probably gave me a few chances. He gave me books to read and things like that, and I never did like properly commit to it, I guess, to his like style of leadership. But I remember specifically one time, it came to this, like we had these weekly meetings, and he said, "Well, you need adults around you to help guide you." And I was like, totally there. Like, and he's like, "We need to like turn you into the youth pastor you need to be to take on this youth ministry." I was like, yeah, exactly, yeah. And he's like, "So why don't we get like a team of adults around you?" It's like, cool. He's like, "Who do you have in mind?" I was like, "Well, these people, these people, these people." I chose a bunch of people. He chose some people, and we had this like team of people that would like come and like sit in on meetings and like kind of like just be there for me, and we could like work stuff out, help plan events, do things. And then only a few weeks later, he was like, "If all these adults are helping you, Dave, why are you getting paid and they're not getting paid?" And then I was like, "Oh yeah, true." And I was like, "Yeah, that's a very good point." And he's like, "If we really want to like get this ministry going, like that feels unfair, right?" I was like, "Yeah, it does." And I was like, and then he essentially talked me into resigning. So I resign with the idea that I'm resigning so the youth ministry has more money, with my wage, and then I'm working as a volunteer as the youth pastor, but in a team of adults, right? And I've never told this story before on publicly. And then we go to our first Wednesday meeting, and my first leaders meeting with the all the leaders there, and I'm like, "All right, guys," and I'm stepping up to the plate. I'm like, "Here's this is time for me to step up to the plate. I'm going to really show everyone that I can do this." So I start running a meeting, and this other person starts butting in all the time. I'm like, "What are they doing? Like, why are they just like constantly trying to kind of run the meeting, and I'm trying to kind of run the meeting?" So I went up to them afterwards, and I was like, "Hey, I'm a little bit confused with what's going on." And they said, "Oh yeah, the I won't say his name, but pastor told us that we'll be taking over the youth ministry." And I was like, "No, that's not right. Obviously, like it was very clearly I chose to step down to help the ministry, and then us as a group of adults would help run the ministry until I'm ready to kind of take that role again." Like I was very naive in believing that they were telling me the truth. So I was like, let's organize a meeting. So we have a meeting. We come in, and I'm like, "Pastor, they seem to, I was like, we had a bit of an issue the other day at this leaders meeting where, they were trying to run the meeting and I was trying to run the meeting. And I was like, but like, are they across the board?" And we start this meeting, and I still remember they said, this pastor said, "Well, the position of youth pastor is really up in the air for anyone to have." And my jaw like dropped, and I was like, "What do you mean?" And then I realized that he'd been talking to these other adults saying, "Hey, maybe you might be able to take over the youth ministry." And then he'd been telling me, well, this is what I assume anyway, and then he'd be telling me that you'll be taking over the youth ministry. But how it was like told to me and why I stepped down from my position was, it was like, you just need some more training. You need these adults to come around you and all this stuff. And so, yeah, like long story short, I got kind of like slowly weaseled out of that position. And eventually, the youth ministry, when I took it over, was like 120 people coming on a Friday night. It dropped a lot because we lost a lot of people and change of leadership. We've got down to maybe like 70 or 80 people. And then, shortly after, when I lost the job and was no longer in the position of youth pastor, was no longer in a position of leadership, eventually it was like 10 or 15 people coming on a Friday night. And there was like Facebook groups of these youth starting like petitions saying, "Bring back Dave," and like and all this stuff. And I was just like, "Oh, that's cute, but it's not going to happen." Not because anything I wanted to do, but it was heartbreaking. It was like horrible. It was I took it very seriously, like ministry. I really truly believed that I had a vision from God for where the youth ministry was going to go. I believe that I told all my leaders this story, like this is where we're going. There's green pastures over the hill. Like, follow me. We're doing this. Like, let's do this. And we're walking through the mud. And then I was forced to leave the mud. And all the leaders are sitting there going, you promised us green pastures. And now there's like, we're in this mud. And I felt incredible amount of responsibility, an incredible amount of pain. Like, I went through years of pain, a lot of pain because of that. So it's, breaks my heart hearing your story. I can totally empathize.
Yeah, and I think I too was heartbroken about it, because you come in thinking, I finally made it. I'm working with like the people of, and the men and the women of God, and this should be different, right? It should be at least very different than the world, the cruel world that I was also. And so, but that's not the case. There's no mercy. Like, it's really, it comes down to the numbers, comes down to the money. If that's okay, the numbers are good, the money is good, then we're good. But if the money and the numbers are not good, then no one's good. And so, we tried, and it just didn't feel right. And then you could fast forward maybe 5 to 6 years later. We're still not going to church. We're still not, I'm not pursuing ministry at all. Not even thinking about it. I went back to the field of dentistry that I was working in while I was in school. And I never looked back.
So when did you start deconstructing, or when did you first start going, maybe this, because you mentioned having this, I can't mention it, but like having these ideas that you don't have time to look into when you're a pastor, that you learn in seminary, ministry college, Bible college. When did you start to, like, I guess, unpack those things again and go, let's have a look at this?
Yeah, I'd say like right around the pandemic. Maybe that's starting to be a cliche. But yeah, I have to be honest. I started listening to podcasts about Bible studies, listening to Matt Dillahunty as well, because
there's your first mistake.
Yeah, I mean, does God even exist? Because you're thinking, well, it really seems like this book is not divinely inspired. It may be just the work of men. So naturally, let's wonder if there's even a God behind all this somehow. But even philosophical arguments, there's just not enough evidence for I'd say anyone to believe that actually there is a God. So along that, I'm listening to the scholars that are being featured in Myth Vision.
There's your second mistake.
Yeah, and so see, while I was in seminary, they warn you about these liberal, these liberal scholars that are to be avoided at all costs.
Bart Ehrman, Elaine Pagel, like
Elaine Pagel's
put on John Bevere and then get back to work.
But I remember that in I think it was one of those introduction to the New Testament Gospels courses that I took by Darrell Bach. He's like one of those evangelical historical Jesus academics in favor of the historical Jesus from Dallas Seminary. He as part of the course, he assigned Bart Ehrman's Introduction to the New Testament. And so I started reading that, and I'm like, he definitely has a different perspective on this. And so what's that all about? I mean, it's got the Oxford publishers, on the hardcover. So it must be good. But the stuff he's saying it doesn't line up with what they're teaching me here. And so I think that sort of piqued my interest to look elsewhere at the very least. And then it's like, all right, well, let's dig deep as to what they're saying, because I think it's worth it, right? So then I'm getting books by other academics, and it's like, yeah, no, they don't seem to agree, and it really does seem that the only ones that are believing that this is true are like my fellow evangelicals. But once you go outside of theological seminaries, like at the universities, that's not the case anymore. They're not trying to necessarily promote their dogmas. They're thinking like historians, or they're thinking like archaeologists, or they're thinking like language experts. They're not trying to just say, yeah, this is true, and these are the reasons why. So yeah, I mean, slowly but surely, I came across a lot of other insights that perhaps put this, the stamp of approval, I would say, the stamp of certification, you would say.
Did you have a moment? Was there a moment when you're like, oh shit, I don't believe anymore?
I did. Yeah, I did have a moment where I'm like, I just don't think there's a God anymore. And I remember like we were having a conversation, because usually what would happen is on a daily basis, I would come home and play a video or reading a book, and then Apostate Ann and I would like circle back and be like, all right, so what did you learn today? And she would tell me, oh, I learned this and that. I'm like, yeah, and I also read this, and so said that, and we would just like have this dialogue on the daily. And one day we just looked at each other and like, you know what? Because she really hesitated, because she felt like for the longest time I was just very much like this fundamentalist Bible thumper guy. So she was like scared to tell me, hey, I don't really believe in God. But then when she said something like, you know what, me too, I feel the same way. And so then from then on, it was just like, yeah, this is obviously problematic.
Yeah. Wow.
That's incredible. Us together, man. It was good. It was really good for us as a couple too, because we wrestled with a lot of like, like those biblical concepts of like hierarchy at the home and leadership.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we always struggled with that. Like I never felt like it worked, like you either are being a tyrant to your wife. And so, yeah, I mean, for us to find out that, hey, the way that we've been raised and, and with the way we learn how to think about marital relationships and people and like politics and all that has been tainted by this fundamentalism that's very toxic. And so we changed. I mean, I was along with being an evangelical, I was a conservative, politically speaking. I was very hardcore into all that, and that also changed too. So yeah, it's been life transforming.
Yeah, I can just relate so much to your story. Like it's I think the first time I came to Amy with anything was I read the book Love Wins by Rob Bell.
Oh yeah.
Back when, but this was before I was deconstructing. I was just like, I'm going to read the sacred text, the text that got him to, I know it's fake, it's not real, but I'm going to see what his arguments were. And I read it. It's not convincing, but at the time it was like, huh. And I remember saying to Amy, I was like, what if there is no hell or heaven? And Amy's my wife, and Amy's like, I don't like to think about that. I don't want to think about that like that. I don't like to think that there is no heaven or hell or like And it's funny because just that thought, that one question, that thought, and Amy's reaction, we didn't really talk about it after that. But like a couple of weeks later, Amy was like, "You know what? If this is our one life, I want to like live it to the fullest. I want to like, you know, I want to see as many musicals as I want to see. I want to exercise. I want to climb mountains. I want to travel. I want to have kids. I want to, you know, I want to like embrace life because if this is all we have, you know, what's the downside? If it's not all we have, what's the downside? We just live an amazing life." But I think that the trap is when you get caught up in the ministry world and the church world is you start to treat this life like a doormat for the next life. You start to treat it like a doormat that you wipe your feet on before you go into the next life. You don't necessarily worry about like retiring, you know, about having a good career. I told my younger brother, who's just finished his career now, but I told him like 15 years ago, I said, "What good's a university degree in heaven, Leo?" And he was like, "Good point. This is fresh out of school. Good point, Dave," and didn't go to university. And now, you know, 10 years later, he finally decided to go to university and get a degree. But like dumb advice like that is just like rampant in like.
Oh yeah. I got that advice too. Like, hey, you don't need to go to seminary to be a pastor.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you know, but I think some of them, they know, like maybe if you learn too much, you're gonna get in trouble. You know, like if you go actually and learn stuff at the, you know, higher education level, that you might deconvert. Like I think some of them, they share that perspective that you're better off not receiving a higher education because of that reason.
Do you before we because we're coming up to 90 minutes, but I want to quickly plug a couple of things, and I've got some more questions. And can you go over a little bit if you don't?
Yeah,
cool. So first of all, everyone should go check out your podcast, the Apostate of Mind podcast. It's really, really cool. Good stuff on there. I think this is where I first saw you guys. Matt Powell. Oh, he's the best. I really appreciated your video on. I don't think I finished it, but I liked what you were putting down. The Isaiah 53 episode. I'd love to talk to you more about that. But that was really good. You can see I watched a fair bit of it. But go check out the Apostate of Mind podcast. It's linked in the description, of course. And you also have a Spanish YouTube channel for people who are Spanish speaking, and that's here as well. So that's also, actually, I don't think it is linked. Let me just drop it in the comments down below.
Yeah, in fact, I'm kind of a Johnny come lately when it comes to, not only when it comes to having deconstructed, but starting a channel. So we've only been doing this for about a year. But before I started my own channel, I was part of Nuestra Experiencia Atea. And they're more than just a channel. It's a community on Facebook, and we're like friends now with a large group of people that they speak Spanish, and it's our atheist experience. And I'm there live every Sunday. We do Bible study. For example, we are currently in our study of Deuteronomy. We're completing the first 5 books of Moses. And so we dig deep. You can see that that's our 77th episode. So we've done a lot of Bible study there.
Is it in Spanish or English?
It's all in Spanish. Yep.
Yeah, cool.
And then we do live broadcasts where we have a panel of a guy he's so smart. His name is Rafa, and he's like all into philosophy, and then I've got another guy, Nathan, that's a historian, and he knows a lot about Christianity and religion. And then there's a couple of ex-Jehovah Witnesses that are part of the team. Teo is the VTuber guy who's the caricature. He's an ex-Jehovah's Witness. And then there's Alma, who's also an ex-Jehovah's Witness, and she's so bright. And so it's a great panel of people. And we do that every Sunday.
So that's awesome. So if you speak Spanish, check out that. And then there's also Apostate of Mind for us English speakers, which is also great as well. And it's got Apostate N on there, which is great too. Cool. That's the links in the description and links in the chat. But I really wanted to ask you a question that D actually just posted as a super chat. So thank you so much, D, for the super chat. It's $10 super chat. D was one of the original Deep Drinks 12 disciples on Patreon. So she'll always have a special place in my heart. But did leaving the church change your opinion on social or political issues? How much did your brain shift after leaving the bubble?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was very much a Republican conservative, and I think I may have voted for Trump his first, you know.
I'm burning.
Shameful past.
Shame.
No. Yeah, drastically changed. So
it's funny because mine, I was the same. I wasn't necessarily like staunchly conservative or anything. I remember being shocked to find out that it was the Christians who had the guns in America. I was like, what do you mean? The guns are evil. Like, I'm Australian. Duh. Like, I just couldn't believe that. Anyway, but this is my dumb Australian perspective. But for me, I was the same. I actually something that I said to Amy, and this is kind of what I want to jump off with you, is how did it affect raising your kids? Because for me, when we were planning, going through IVF and planning to have a kid, and when we eventually had Atlas, before that, I was writing down all these things like, oh no, like, oh shit, like what are our values? Because we can't just point to the Bible and say stealing is wrong anymore. So like, is stealing wrong? Like, I wanted to get really fundamental into like, what makes a good person? Like, what do we value in life? For me, it was, I actually wrote a list of things like being kind to people, which I don't always do all the time on Twitter. Honesty, integrity, facing your fears, things like that. Like these are all like things that I thought were good virtues. Being honest, telling the truth. But like, how did, there's this perspective that when you leave Christianity or when you leave a religion, you just like, you drive straight from church to your local orgy, and you have an orgy for a little while, and then you murder some kittens, and then you drive to go do heroin in like the back of some like van. Like, essentially, like, how do you like, where do you get your values from now? Where do you get your morals from? Like, what do you teach your kids?
So I mean, when it comes to like morality and everything, I think that still kind of remains the same. But I think it's improved. I think our morality has to improve in the sense that you're no longer thinking that you need to do something a certain way because you're going to displease a God. You're going to end up getting sent to hell if you're a sinner. Whereas now it's more like you really are just considerate of other people and their well-being. And it's not a matter of my eternal consequences, but more like, what is just, what is good for others and myself. So I think it puts it in a different, healthier perspective, certainly a less selfish perspective, which is something that you certainly wouldn't see it that way if you're in the church. You're thinking you're honoring God and that's your job and that's what you're called to do, but you're just really trying to please, or so I think that makes things better. When it comes to our children, I'd say that it did affect greatly in the sense that I remember, they're now 13, actually 14 and 15. So when we started deconstructing, they were right at that age where I think in school, perhaps they started like wondering about things like sexuality and stuff like that. Like one of my kids went through a phase where she thought that she was bi. And I remember that I gave her like a haircut that would like fade the back of her head. It's kind of a tomboy type of haircut. that she ended up like wearing, and her, she changed clothing and she was a little more tomboyish. And that's something that I would have never like allowed as a Christian. Like, no, like God, very binary.
Yeah,
But
it's shameful for a woman to cut her hair, right?
Oh my gosh. So, but fortunately for our kids, like we had already, we started like, getting rid of all that garbage. And so we were I think we were very supportive of their faith and helping them figure out, who they are and what they like and all that stuff. So, I think they greatly benefited from us changing. It was a shocker for them because like we were like church people, and then in a matter of like 3-4 years, like it's all behind us.
Yeah.
We baptized our kids in our backyard. It was that kind of, we were that kind of family. I'm the oldest of my cousins, so like my family, my grandmother always like looked up on me, and like I was like the family pastor, and so like I felt like I always had the responsibility for like leading prayer, like getting people together, like organizing Christmas and Thanksgiving. I was involved in all that stuff, and it's like, okay, well, no, I'm not doing this anymore. Don't even ask me to pray.
Yeah.
And that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
but the family adopted. So.
When we have friends over now, like just non-religious friends, we're about to have dinner. If we're sitting around a table, I'll grab everyone's hands and they're like, "What?" I'm like, "Let's say a prayer." And I'm like, "Dear Neil deGrasse Tyson, thank you for giving us the scientific method." And I'm like, "Amen." And it's just like everyone's like, "What the hell?" Super weird. But yeah, I like a big thing for me too was LGBT rights, and like I realized like, oh shit, a lot of like what I subscribed to for most of my life was causing great harm to many people, just having the ideology. And when I started to like, not, I was never like anti gay or anything or whatever like that. Oh, actually, I'm catching myself. Maybe I was in high school. No, definitely wasn't high school. Surface level though, not like deep hatred or anything. I just was a classic teenager. But in Australia, which is sad, but I've tried to like really become an ally to the LGBT community, because I just see the harm that churches have done and still do. We recently had a local church walk all through our community, like through our streets, like the pastor going, "I'm starting a church," like making a little video, "I'm starting a church." And I commented and I said, will your church be accepting of LGBT folks? And he private messaged me because he said these things can get complicated. And he wrote this big thing about like some people, they find that God calls them away from their homosexual lifestyle. And I said that's cool. And I said, but what about slavery? Like would you vote slavery back in? And then of course they just disappeared. But like it was realizing the harm that I guess for me that like Christianity had done to the LGBT community, Islam is doing, and Christianity is still doing to the LGBT community, what religion does, and how it actually affects them, is it made me kind of sick to my stomach. So I try very much to be an LGBT ally. In fact, I even say, the old joke is I say if Atlas, our little 1-year-old, if he grows up to be straight, I'll love him anyway. Like I don't care if he's gay, trans, whatever. Like he's totally accepted, totally loved here. I even try not to use like gender affirming like language with him. Like, "You're the best boy ever." I'll be like, "Yeah, best little dude," I'll say, or like, "Oh, how strong you are." But I try not to. Maybe I've gone too far, but I'm trying to like balance out the world that's that's around him at the moment. But yeah, so yeah, I'm a little bit the same.
I've caught myself saying things to my kids like, "Yeah, so when you do decide to settle down with a girl or a guy, whatever, right?"
Yeah.
I would never say it like that. I would never. I would have never said that to my kids.
It's funny because you have to like unlearn. It was like that Seinfeld episode where it's like, "Oh, I heard that they're gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that." Like you have to like, it's like that. So like I have to kind of catch myself. I purposely try to be like, you know, like I'll make like really crude jokes, you know, about like, oh, when they're 16, they'll be running around, you know, fingering people, as I'll say, fingering girls or whatever. I'll said once, so like to my boys, and then someone's like, or boys. I was like, yeah, true. You can be fingering anyone, like when they're 16 years old running around, you know. So I mean, that's a bit crass, but the joke is like, yeah, you've got to kind of correct these like perspectives because like, yeah, it's important. But Mark, I really appreciate having you on, and you're a like from just what I've seen on Apostate of Mind, that you're a treasure trove of content around the Bible, and we didn't even get to touch really onto like some biblical scriptures and stuff. So I'd love to continue having conversations with you because I find it super interesting, and I really appreciate you coming on. And just for anyone who didn't catch the start, I have been sick the last couple of weeks. I apologize. In a couple of days, we have a recorded episode that might be live for Patreon, and then it'll be sent out because the people I'm interviewing don't necessarily want to go live. And it'll be about the second coming of Jesus and how it never happened, which is my perspective. And then, of course, Dr. Kip Davis is coming on soon. We haven't set a date, and Dee from the Stacey's Mum podcast, and we're getting some more people as well. But stay tuned, support us on Patreon, and of course check out the Apostate of Mind podcast. Subscribe to it before you leave here today. Is there anything you want to say, Mark, before we wrap up this interview?
So I want to just say something that you touched upon a little bit earlier, regarding just perspective on this life and having this one life. One of those things that really caught my attention, like it's still with me, is I heard someone say, and I forget who, forgive me for not knowing the source, but something like, you know, we all have two lives. Okay, two lives. But you don't start living the second and final one until you realize that you have just the one. And so that was certainly true for me, because it was not until I realized that this is really it, this is all I've got, that I'm like, oh, well, let's start living life then. And now you start appreciating what you have more so than ever before. And that's what I'm referring to as the second life, because my former life was really not it. That was something else. That was actually death instead.
That is so profound. I love that. Paul has just said, "Carpe diem, motherfuckers." I love that. That's good. Beautifully said. Thank you, Mark, for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you guys for bearing with me as I fight out of the grave of Sheol. I don't know if I'm there yet. Again, I did see that Ben Shapiro was making rap music videos now, so I don't know what's going on. But see you guys all in a few days. Love you all. Bye.